Hey everyone, currently according to the United Nations there are 206 recognized states in the world, but there are plenty more communities who claim for one reason or another that they have the right to independence. Micronations are not regarded as having a legal basis in international law for their sovereignty, but they're generally seen as causing very little harm, so are allowed by countries that they're in. So it's time to tour the world to visit the top 15 smallest micronations that you probably never heard of. Let's begin. Number 15. The Kingdom of North Dumpling, United States. Around a mile or about 1.5 kilometers off the coast of Connecticut is a 2-acre island called North Dumpling Island that's privately owned by Dean Kamen, who was the inventor of the Segbe. It's long been an important piece of land in the area, as the location of the North Dumpling Lighthouse that was built in 1859 to warn ships of the shallow waters, and it remained in operation until 1959. Kamen purchased it in 1986 and began developing the land with, for example, a replica of Stonehenge. But it was his attempts to build a wind turbine that caused issues with local authorities. His request for permission was denied, so in a response, he seceded from the United States. Of course, this wasn't legally recognized at the time, but that didn't stop him from creating a constitution, a flag, a currency, and a national anthem for the island, as well as beginning to refer to himself as Lord Dumpling. Amazingly, because of the contacts he had made as a successful businessman, Kamen claims to have been able to convince President Bush at the time to sign an unofficial non-aggression pact with the micronation, and was subsequently able to build the wind turbine, as well as install solar panels, which means that the Kingdom of North Dumpling is now completely carbon neutral. Number 14. The Free Borough of Llanrwst, Wales. I'm never going to get this pronunciation correct, but Llanrwst is a quaint little market town in the Conwy County Borough of Wales that, because of its long association with the wool trade, has now become a popular tourist destination. Despite usually being described as a Welsh town, however, there's historical precedent that could actually mean it's a micronation in its own right, and centuries of legal challenges have failed to find a resolution to the issue. The claim dates all the way back to the 13th century, when the then Prince of Wales Llewellyn ap Gruffudd took control of the town and declared it to be entirely independent of the local diocese, and therefore a free borough. Despite its attempts by the local clergy to enlist the help of the Pope to overturn this claim, it was able to prove a close family connection to the town, so it was upheld. After his death and in the following centuries as the region of Wales merged together to form the country, further petitions were made to repeal Llanrwst's independence, but they too were rejected because of local resistance. The town would go on to develop its own coat of arms and a flag, and has a motto of Wales, England, and Llanrwst, and even applied to the United Nations in 1947 to be recognized as an independent state within Wales. The UN rejected this submission, but it hasn't stopped the local belief that the town truly is an independent micronation, and with a claim so rooted in history, it's kind of hard to say that they're wrong. Number 13. Axivland, Israel. Founded in 1971 by Eli Avivi, an Iranian-born sailor and member of an elite fighting force of the Haganah, which would become the Israeli Defense Forces, Axivland is a micronation that's located on the border between Lebanon and the western coast of Israel. It's close to the remains of the ancient city of Axiv, from which it takes its name, and it soon became known as a hippie microstate that attracted artists, models, and countercultural figures. Most moved into abandoned buildings that were already on the site, but what was interesting in this case is what happened when Avivi first declared it to be an independent nation. He was arrested, but released just 10 days later after a judge ruled that there was no law against creating a country without permission, and he then went on to sue the government, with the judge in that case ruling that the area should be leased to him for at least 99 years. While this didn't explicitly give Axivland the status of independence, the residents and supporters created a flag, a national anthem, and issued their own passports. Avivi was elected president, which was a position he held until his death in 2018. And while the micronation isn't as busy now as it was in its heyday, it still has a guest house, a campground, and a museum of curious objects that have been found in the surrounding areas. Only one person lives there permanently to oversee things, but with the micronation being actively promoted by the Israeli Ministry of Tourism, it's still visited by a few thousand people each year. Number 12. Freetown Christiania, Denmark. Located on the island of Amager, within a borough of the Danish capital city Copenhagen, is a remarkable district that since 1971 is claimed to be a state in its own right and shuns the rules laid down by the country that surrounds it. It's called Freetown Christiania, and the land had for centuries been used by the military. On September 26 of that year, though, a local writer published a magazine that declared the place to be open and proclaimed it to be a free town. From the beginning, cannabis has been openly sold and consumed there, which is illegal elsewhere in Denmark, but the authorities originally turned a blind eye. By the late 1970s, though, things were getting out of hand and a court ordered for the land to be cleared. But this proved to be controversial, and the residents of Freetown Christiania instead worked together to clean it up and control the prevalence of harder drugs and gang activity. In the following years, new gangs tried to take control of the enclave, but were eventually pushed out, and the officials in Copenhagen returned to their policy of ignoring what happened there as long as it didn't spread further out into the city. Now, with a population of around 1,000 people, the Freetown Christiania leaders have slowly agreed to merge it back into the city for business purposes, and a process has been put in place whereby the current residents are able to legally purchase the land they've been squatting on. Still, with its own flag, coat of arms, and completely different application of the law to the rest of the city, Freetown Christiania remains a micronation and is actually the fourth most popular tourist attraction in Copenhagen, with an estimated 500,000 visitors each year. Number 11. Principality of Snake Hill, Australia. In the early 2000s, a family living in rural Australia near to the town of Mudgee in New South Wales found themselves struggling to pay the taxes that were demanded of them each year. They decided they had to do something after legal proceedings were taken against them, and they took inspiration from the story of another micronation in the country. So, with nothing in Australian law preventing them from setting up a new country, at least in the way that they had interpreted things, they declared independence on September 2, 2003. Calling it a remedial right and a last resort, and comparing their move to the cessation of the U.S. from England in 1776, Prince Paul was crowned as the first leader of the Principality of Snake Hill, with his wife, Princess Helena, ruling alongside him. Covering a similar area as Monaco, Snake Hill has now a few hundred citizens, and while Paul has since died, Princess Helena still oversees the territory with her daughter, Princess Paula. There are two newspapers that are published from Snake Hill, a church, and the micronation has its own currency too, but legal issues with the Australian courts have continued. There's still a dispute to whether a secession like this is actually legal, but in the latest ruling it was declared that the Supreme Court of New South Wales didn't have the jurisdiction to make a decision, and that it was a matter of international law that needed to be looked at by the High Court of Australia and the International Court of Justice. Props to you. Number 10. Free Republic of Lieberland, Croatia, Serbia. Virtually all of the land in the world is claimed by at least one recognized country, but there are a few parcels of land that for various reasons have been forgotten about, and those are the perfect locations to establish a micronation. This is exactly what happened in 2015, when Czech politician Vít Jedlička laid claim to a 2.7 square mile plot of land that's on the floodplain of the Danube River and declared it as a micronation called the Free Republic of Lieberland. It lies on the border between Croatia and Serbia, but because of a complex border dispute between the countries that's continued for decades, with one of the points of contention being whether the border should follow the route the river originally took or that it now takes after engineering works changed its course, Jedlička found that neither country was claiming the land. He formed a government and sent notices to the authorities in Croatia and Serbia about his claim under the terra nullius doctrine, as well as creating a flag, a coat of arms, and a proposed currency. Despite all this, Lieberland has no permanent residence, and the only structure there has apparently been abandoned for at least 30 years. Furthermore, people that try to travel to Lieberland, including Jedlička himself, usually are arrested by Croatian authorities and prevented from crossing the border, which has left this new micronation in limbo. Number 9. Grand Duchy of Flandrensis, Antarctica. Forming a micronation isn't always about protecting your land or trying to create a brand new society, and in the case of the Grand Duchy of Flandrensis, no citizen has ever set foot on the land that it claims. It was formed in 2008 by Niels Vermeersch, a Belgian national who is the current head of state of Flandrensis and claims 5 islands that lie off the coast of Antarctica. Vermeersch's interpretation of the Antarctic Treaty meant he was within his rights to do this, but his letters that he sent to the UN and signatories of the treaty were largely ignored. His move did, however, put him in diplomatic conflict with another micronation called West Arctica, which led to the formation of the Antarctic Micronational Union that aims to resolve disputes between micronations on the continent. Still, the intent of Flandrensis, which was inspired by the historic county of Flanders, is to draw attention to ice melting and climate change, and it's been registered as an environmental non-profit organization since 2021. It's got its own ID cards, currency, flag, and constitution, and currently has 857 citizens from 73 different countries, proudly calling itself the only country in the world that doesn't want its land to be inhabited by people. A regular attendee at Micronations summits and still trying to draw attention to the cause, Vermeersch releases regular videos of speeches from his home in Belgium and rewards anyone who contributes towards the micronation or the environment with noble titles. Number 8. Principality of Sealand, UK. During the Second World War, the British built a series of these sea forts in international waters between the English coastline and the European mainland that became Army and Navy bases to protect against enemy forces, such as German mine-laying aircraft. Known as the Mansell Sea Forts after the designer, they were all decommissioned in the late 1950s, but one of them, Ruff's Tower, which is around 7 miles off the coast of Suffolk, was soon taken over by pirate radio broadcasters. By 1967, Paddy Roy Bates had taken over the site with the intention of launching his own radio station from it, but despite having all the equipment to do so, he instead declared the tower's independence and called it the Principality of Sealand. It was at the time outside of the territorial waters of Britain, and even though this has now changed, courts have refused to hear proceedings against the claim because it falls into a legal gray area. In 1975, Bates revealed the Micronations Constitution, a national flag, a national anthem, and the design for the currency and passports. And in recent years, it became the only micronation to have its own soccer and football teams, although they don't take part in officially recognized international competitions. Since Bates died, there are now only believed to be 2 permanent residents in Sealand, but with recent attempts to launch a data storage site and a cryptocurrency, the desire to fully establish it as a nation in its own right is still as active as ever. Number 7. The Republic of Jumpland, Sweden. Europe as we now know it is made up of 44 different countries, but this is relatively a recent number, and it was once made up of many hundreds of self-governing regions that have since merged together. Between the 10th and the 12th centuries, the Republic of Jumpland, which is in the middle of Scandinavia, was one of these, but was annexed by the Crown of Norway in 1178. It still, however, retained certain privileges unlike any other territories and essentially ruled itself, with the only connection to the rest of the country being that it paid the royal taxes. Over the centuries, it was all but forgotten and became part of Sweden, but in 1963 a new Republic of Jumpland was found in reaction to the number of people who were emigrating away from the country. The elected leaders have been people with a background in comedy and show business, and while it's been described as being 51% in jest and 49% in earnest, the point of this micronation is to preserve its culture, language, and its way of life in the face of a rapidly dwindling population. With its own national anthem, currency, and flag, there isn't a huge amount of support, domestically, for it to be an independent state, but it continues to organize entertainment events that bring the community together. Number 6. The Kingdom of Redonda, Caribbean. Most of the larger islands in the Caribbean are recognized as states in their own right, and normally their territory covers the smaller land masses around them. But there's one tiny little island that covers an area of just over 3/4 of a square mile that also claims its independence as the Kingdom of Redonda. It's located on Redonda Island, which is legally part of Antigua and Barbuda, but lies between Nevis and Montserrat. It's got a huge amount of bird life, which led to it being an important place in the late 19th to early 20th century, where it was used for guano mining. But with no sources of fresh water, it isn't ideal for long-term human habitation. The origins of it being a micronation can be traced back to 1865, when a trader and preacher from Montserrat realized that no country appeared to have laid claim to the island. So he claimed it for himself and even requested this to be recognized by Queen Victoria, something that was eventually agreed on by the British Colonial Office on the understanding there would never be a revolt against the colonial power. The preacher's son was ordained as the first king of Redonda at the age of 15 in 1880 by a bishop from Antigua, and while there's never been a permanent settlement on the island other than for mining activities, people can be named as peers of the micronation, and they're still a royal family. There have even been attempts to set up an embassy around the world, often in an attempt to overcome laws elsewhere. But because the UN doesn't currently recognize Redonda as an independent nation, these have been unsuccessful. Number 5. Principality of Las, France. Small communities around the world would often find themselves being forced to make changes at the behest of national governments, while they make things better for the country as a whole that don't exactly benefit everyone else. That's the situation that the Commune of Los found itself in 2011, and the local leaders felt they had no choice but to take decisive action. It's a place with around 150 residents that's in southwestern France and covers an area of around 2.5 square miles. Of course, life there is very different from what it's like in the large metropolitan areas of the country, and it's almost exactly like you'd expect a quaint, rural French town to be. When France's government announced plans to introduce vast administrative reforms across the country in 2011, what seemed like logical changes for larger communities would have been disastrous in the eyes of the residents of smaller ones and would potentially have forced Los to merge with several of the neighboring villages. The then mayor proposed seceding in protest, and they officially announced their independence on the first day of 2015. Largely seen as a protest and not really serious, the move resulted in the village being able to retain its mayor and other officials, which was the main point of contention, and it also had the benefit of driving tourism to the area. With their own flag and coat of arms, they often arrange various events and projects, such as a boulevard styled after the Hollywood Walk of Fame, that make it a surprising and unique place to find in the French countryside. Number 4. The Morawari Republic, Australia. Because of its tricky constitutional history and a legal framework that appears to have created gray areas when it comes to declaring a region as an independent state, Australia has a surprising number of regions that regard themselves as micronations. The one at first that seems to have the strongest claim is the Morawari Republic, which first declared its independence in 2013. The disputed region covers an area of 31,000 square miles, and it's on the border between the states of New South Wales and Queensland, and it's the traditional homeland of the Morawari people, an Australian Aboriginal people who have been there since long before Australia itself was recognized as a country. Roughly triangular in shape, the declaration of this micronation in 2013 was sent to Australia's Prime Minister, the Premiers of Queensland and New South Wales, and Queen Elizabeth II, with the demand for a response within 21 days. No reply was ever received. Leaders of the Morawari Republic took this as a sign they could just continue and created a foreign office and a defense office and began to petition the UN to be internationally recognized. Today, the claims remain unrecognized though, but this could partly be because of concerns surrounding who is pushing for the move. Despite taking the name and claiming historical lands, the vast majority of the population, including its leadership, are non-Indigenous Australians and aren't related to the Morawari people, so there are questions surrounding the validity of the ownership of the land in the first place. Number 3. The Glacier Republic, Chile. With climate change beginning to severely affect glaciers around the world, the Glacier Republic was established by Greenpeace in March of 2014. Officially, it claims territory that's on the ice field on the border between Chile and Argentina, where due to legal loopholes, neither country has claimed sovereignty. At least that's what their lawyers believe. Rather than planning to turn this into a community where people live there, the intent of this micronation is to bring awareness to the activity of mining companies near to the glaciers, and how there currently are no attempts to protect them because Chile hasn't got any laws to prevent the destruction of glaciers. One of the founding principles of the Glacier Republic is that as soon as the Chilean government enacts legislation to guarantee and protect the integrity of the glaciers, it'll disband and return to the territory of Chile. But so far, the government has failed to respond. Amazingly, within just 10 days of its formation, the Glacier Republic saw more than 40,000 people sign up to become residents from around the world. This figure is now thought to be in excess of 100,000 people. With all these people regularly being kept in touch about petitions and proceedings and exerting pressure when they're able to, the Republic has now some serious campaigning potential behind it, and the organizers continue to hope that it will eventually lead to the much-needed reform to help protect vital natural features of the environment. Number 2. Principality of Sealand, Italy. With such a history of small territories being independent, then conquered, then traded across the continent, it's no surprise that micronations are commonly declared across Europe, and it's also where you'll find two of the smallest recognized microstates in the world, the Vatican City and Monaco. Just 22 miles from Monaco, there's another place that certainly seems to have historic precedence for a claim to its independence. That's located near the French border in the Italian province of Imperia. Known as the Principality of Sealand, it covers an area of around 5.5 square miles, and the first modern attempt to claim its sovereignty took place in 1963. According to the man behind the petition, Sealand had never actually been part of the House of Savoy, that became part of the Kingdom of Italy during the Italian unification in 1861, and was instead part of the Holy Roman Empire until it was dissolved in 1806, at which point its independence was restored. Italian authorities dispute this interpretation of events, but the independence claims remain active to this day, with the wealth of historic documentation in support of the claim only continuing to build. The almost 300 residents certainly act as if they're independent, with their own currency that's pegged to the US dollar, a volunteer border guard, and a reigning monarchy. But whether or not they'll actually finally establish their independence in law is still to be seen. Number 1. The Conch Republic, United States. Life in the Florida Keys definitely works in a different way to anywhere else in the United States. So when some residents of Key West began attempts to secede from the country in 1982 as the Conch Republic, it was largely seen as a joke. But there were very real reasons behind the move, and there are still plenty who consider it to be a micronation today. It was in that year that the U.S. Border Patrol set up checkpoints on U.S. Highway No. 1, which is the only route into the Keys, and began searching vehicles for narcotics and illegal immigrants. Effectively cutting the Keys off from the mainland, this had major impact on the freedom of residents and the tourism industry, and any complaints by the city council to the federal government fell on deaf ears. They've then said that because the border essentially made them a foreign nation, that they may as well become one, so Key West's independence was declared on April 23, 1982. Almost immediately, they declared war on the United States and then surrendered after about a minute and then requested $1 billion in foreign aid. And officials from the Conch Republic were even invited to the Summit of the Americas in Miami in 1994. With souvenir passports, unique license plates, and further friction with the U.S. government, you'll find Conch Republic flags wherever you go in Key West, and they still celebrate Independence Day every year on April 23rd. I'll see you next time.
Watch our binge-watching playlist if you'd like to watch all of our most popular top 15 videos. Grab a drink, grab a snack, and get ready to binge.